kind of brought up the aspect of sort of considering a larger project at the end. This isn't maybe the most explicit thing from the research, but I think a lot of them pointed to this model of having all these opportunities for feedback in which the final project is going to be worth a lot more, and there's obviously opportunity to build in some other projects that could be worth something, but the feedback is what's building you to the project where you couldn't get to that point and fail because you've been putting all this work in and getting so much feedback and changing and growing that the grade is somewhat nominal, but it fills that requirement for the university. But as long as you're engaging throughout, you are gaining the knowledge to produce that sort of important document. This isn't technically from the research, but I'm sure there'd be opportunities to grade those. It's not the most suggested model, but I'm sure if there was an opportunity for a small grade to be given on the participation aspect at least, or the engagement, attending a group session, or showing up to class, there'd be opportunity to sort of fill those requirements. Like, I think to your point, like that would be where you could instill, like, I think again, it starts to move away from the self-directedness, but instilling some sort of like question set, or at least the participation aspect where you're doing it and you're meeting a page length or something like that could be grounds enough for reflection. Then the feedback aspect would be helping you improve that reflection. But again, the mark wouldn't be on the content, it would be on the evolution itself. So that's definitely where these problems, and I think that's kind of why these self-directive models haven't had the huge integration into university. It's been slow trickle down effect because it requires some level of fundamental shift, and I think that hasn't happened yet, but it feels like it's happening now. So I think they all sort of alluded to the idea that peer groups would work better in a larger classroom, and then of course the classroom that has TAs, they would require their own sort of training session to be able to take on sort of an instructor role and navigate their own tutorial or group that would be the learning groups. But I don't think I found across anyone that's actually gave any sort of number specific or course specific. The only big thing I can say is that there definitely was sort of stress on keeping self-directed learning integration into class at the lower level, so maybe a project or two at the first year undergrad sort of level, and then considering something like a SLICC where it's the entire course at an upper level. But I think that's reflective of the fact that they just still haven't found that students have the skills, so it would be on the instructors to sort of put that extra effort in to ensure that students are both learning and integrating. So it would be easier with an upper year student. It would be more work for an instructor with a lower year student. It's always going to be that fundamental shift into the models that we have now. So thinking in instructor-led courses, the idea of help seeking is still kind of taboo. You find that less and less students come to your office hours. So creating the space is sort of the first step, and then as students start to engage, they'll come more to these spaces. But I think there's an intrinsic sort of assumption that students won't come that comes from instructor-led models, whereas there's not as much support for them in that sense. So it's sort of that learning curve where students might not come at first, but we're ensuring that environment's fostered and ensuring that students know it's there and that there's opportunity is an important step that I think is a bit lost in a lot of this research, or has been flushed out as lost in a lot of past instructive models. So ensuring that students are making that leap to a less authoritarian instructor and thinking about instructors as potential mentors, as colleagues in a sense, is pivotal, and it comes with that fundamental shift in our thinking. But I think we're on the trajectory there. The rubric is our huge sort of unfortunate, not clear takeaway from the literature. These three models that I presented are sort of the best approaches to considering. This one is far more inclusive, and I definitely urge everyone to take a look at the EATS model because I think it's really well laid out, and it's a bit of a complicated one to explain, but it just goes through sort of the processes of assessing students, providing feedback, designing the process, and then actually considering how students are actually engaging with that. So starts with making sure they know what they're doing, which is something I think is lost in a lot of instructor models, having those clarification meetings to be absolutely positive that both people are on the same page, providing feedback and having those check-in points to make sure students are understanding that feedback, and then kind of thinking about this entire process throughout the design process. And again, there was the feedback one that just sort of discusses the capacity for feedback, but it doesn't really speak to the growth aspect, unfortunately. And then the other one that I pulled that does discuss about self-meta reflections. So perhaps there'd be some way to format this to think about at the beginning of the course how much you have changed in your competency, but it still wouldn't lack that sort of rubric aspect that would gain a bit more of a conditional knowledge. The feedback for learning paper did have a lot, maybe not necessarily for growth, but for growth in sort of that self-assessment aspect. So considering how the feedback plays a role, I think this paper was a bit on the longer side, but I can go through and take a look to see if there were any actual checklists. I don't think so, but sort of a guide on considering how your feedback as an instructor influences students and sort of navigating that process of providing feedback that through their research has been proven to be successful in promoting that growth. There was a lot of talk about like flexibility and considering the term. So I think in university teaching, flexibility is not a word we hear a lot or want to hear. And I think the way they use it in these models is different than the way we think about it in just open. It's not an open-ended course. It's building models that are inherently flexible to student learning. So acknowledging that things might change, that there is room for constant growth and development without leaving things open-ended. So I think that in your wording in that development process, it's so counterintuitive, but thinking about that flexibility as an approach rather than just an adjective for not doing a ton is important. At least that's what everyone seemed to agree. But it was an interesting take for me, so I just wanted to reiterate that. I think also that connection to that we're seeing research coming out that's saying that self-directed learning models are directly correlated to success in the workforce, also something that would be good to emphasize, because as much as the university needs those sorts of measurements of success, I think, before they make changes. So stressing we're seeing all the students that do it are successful could be helpful in pushing that fundamental change a little bit further.
Oh, Mary, yeah, workload is an important consideration. Our students said there was no way they could handle more than one course with this much reflection in a term. Yeah. Again, just speaking to that, having it integrated into the curriculum, you definitely don't want 5 first-year instructors or 5 fourth-year instructors all implementing SLICCs in their course.
And workload for instructors too, like especially this stage, it's, as UFL said today, it's a lot of work. So trying to get a prof that wouldn't be that interested anyway to do one would be impossible if there's not some sort of push from for more validity in it. People are not always seeking out teaching methods like everyone here, so it's all important to consider.
Yeah, and that just raises a whole new thing. I remember early on in our learning community, some instructors were raising the very issue of students will push back because they'll feel I'm not doing my job. And there go my ratings, because you're not teaching me.
Which is funny because the research says that it's more work, it's a lot more work, but it doesn't do, again, our models of what we think teaching and learning is. So there's even just that mindset shift for students too that is necessary and will be a bit of a hurdle.
I know that one of the areas we've been emphasizing is that peer review or peer support model. We were saying that we thought that was something that was lacking, but your comment though made me think of what support do we provide peers to help them provide that kind of constructive feedback. And how do you go about, even in Tracy's course, how do I nurture a trusting environment with 600 students and a number of TAs who may not all be at the same level, of nurturing even a small community within the group that they're responsible for marking.
I mean, it definitely works on sort of like there's a bunch of courses on building rapport with students and creating those sort of relationships. I think there even is a feedback directed one. I think the issue is attendance is not as expansive as the university is. I don't even think we would have the resources to meet everyone's needs, but
exactly,
I think it's a good avenue to develop more. And I know, I'm not sure about Waterloo, but when I went to Laurier, I was required to take a couple of these sorts of courses by my prof. I don't think it was a university run, so maybe building those models into the courses, like building into your TA time to take a feedback course or to engage with CT in some level could be a good avenue to sort of start that higher learning process and engagement for TAs. Yeah. So I think this is like not the the entirety of there's so much research, there's so many great avenues. I think, as we've all found, they are lacking in that assessment model, which we all would love to just get our hands on, a nice rubric that could approach these sorts of models, but it's not quite there yet. But I think they give a lot of direction to considering how to approach students, how to approach TAs, and how to consider integrating these sorts of programs into courses at all degrees. So we saw through the presentations and through everyone here that there's some smaller SLICCs being integrated into a course. There's full SLICCs for singular students. So there's a lot of a scale to which these can be integrated for different learning environments that could maybe answer some of these questions and meet some of the needs of time management, of actually engaging with students, taking on maybe a bit of a smaller approach. Again, I don't love that I have to leave off on the only two real possible answers I have for you on a pass fail or a just continued feedback for that sort of stressful final project that's worth a lot. But I just want to emphasize again that this sort of model would be that constant feedback where you're getting some level of participation for doing it, not so much on what you're doing. You're getting feedback on exactly how you are reflecting, not on what you're reflecting on. So it's focusing on the process rather than the content, so that students can come confidently into the final project and know that they're going to be getting a good grade because they've engaged with the whole model. So it's rethinking marking to think about how you're assessing the engagement rather than how you're assessing the content, because the content will come naturally through these feedback processes. And I also just want to stress, like through Catherine and I conversations and when Brendan joined, there will be some outlier people that are not engaging in the way they should be and that are going to struggle with this model. And often they're people that could struggle with other models as well. And I think those are people that are important to interact with, and those are important people to kind of push a little bit further into these feedback processes and perhaps stress the importance of them, because I know some students won't always see that. But the inherent nature of these, and through the research that I found, is that there's so much flexibility to be accessible, to meet students' needs. And as far as I've come across, this is sort of a type of learning that could be helpful for all. So I think there's a lot to be developed here, and I think everyone raised amazing points.